Hello, class or classes. I hope things are going well. We're going to take some more notes today, particularly on evolution and natural selection. We're going to put that on page 49, and then your output is going to be to draw out your notes and put them into picture form on page 50. So go ahead and pause if you need to, and when you're ready, flip with me to page 49. So let's start by making a T-chart on page 49. We're going to look at two competing theories for what evolution is. Obviously, people have been debating this for many, many, many years. There are many theories out there, and these are just two, both of which have been widely accepted at some point in history. First being Lamarck. This man, Lamarck, he created a theory called the theory of acquired traits, and that was widely accepted for a long time. But through some research by a man named Charles Darwin, who I'm sure you've heard of, his theories were kind of shot down. And that kind of happens in science. Something is considered a theory if it's what everyone agrees, and it's usually based on fact and clear research. But sometimes someone comes along and just goes, you know what? Nope, you're wrong. So that was Darwin in this case. We'll talk about both of these theories. Lamarck being the one that I'm going to put an X is no longer subscribed to, and Darwin, every year we learn more that just continues to prove his theory. So we're going to go from there. Let's start by talking about Lamarck. Lamarck was a man who felt like he was like, I feel like if a giraffe has a long neck, then I guess he probably over time needed to get to his food, needed to get to the trees. And so he probably just stretched really far. And then over time, his neck got longer and longer. And when he had children, he passed that on to his children. So that was the first real theory that was accepted in the scientific world. And that theory is called, let's put it in quotes, the theory of acquired traits. And think about the word acquired, it kind of tells you or hints at what it's about. Over time, you acquire a trait by needing it. If I need a tail, I can create a tail over time, it'll be there. It might sound bizarre, but at the time it was like, okay, maybe over a long period of time that could happen. So this is called the theory of acquired traits, and I'm going to kind of write it out. It's also known as Lamarckism. Okay, and so this basically says, we'll use the giraffe because that was actually what he used. Giraffe seeks food, and usually the changes that Lamarck and actually Darwin, their evidence is often based on food acquisition, how they acquire food. And that's what causes all these changes over time. And while that might be true, the concept that the giraffe simply needs a longer neck, so he stretches his neck, no longer really bought into. Okay, so giraffe seeks food and stretches its neck to reach the leaves. Great, that's the concept. This continual stretching results in a longer neck. So over time, these changes are caused by simply the need for those changes to exist. And that longer neck is going to keep getting passed down. So maybe it's not in one generation that it's really long, but over time it keeps getting passed down generation to generation. It's believed, oh, okay, well, longer neck is passed to offspring, and over time that is considered evolution. Offspring is just another word for the children. This is a symbol that means therefore. Evolution occurs over time. That's it. That's Lamarck in a nutshell. Darwin comes along. You can see their lives in the years kind of overlapped by about 20 years. Their lives overlapped a little bit. And so Darwin was kind of looking and going, I don't think that's true. And he comes along and he creates what's called, which is called the theory of natural selection. I'm sure you've heard it before. Or, AKA also known as Darwinism. Okay. Now, he had many influences which made him believe or start to believe his theory. So some of his influences, this is kind of an important component because it's part of what built his evidence. Now, keep in mind, DNA had not been discovered yet. Well, it's said that it was first discovered in the 1860s by this French chemist, but that hasn't been widely shown or accepted and doesn't really influence Darwin at all. So DNA is not a thing. It really wasn't until the 1950s, Watson and Crick come along and kind of really start diving into DNA and understanding it. And now we have so much understanding of DNA that we can actually really provide a lot of evidence for Darwin. But he didn't have that. He went off of other things. So first thing he went and looked at was selective breeding. Selective breeding is when, let's say you want a less furry dog, you could breed your dog with a less furry dog and create a dog that's less furry. So the concept is over time, humans have been able to be very selective with how they breed certain livestock and certain pets. And that shows that when you combine certain traits that are favorable meaning desired, that or helpful, that you can totally change what something looks like or what their traits are or how they behave. So Darwin's going, well, if you can do that, can't nature do that? Like over time, if something is favorable in nature, it helps them get a certain food or reach a certain height. Wouldn't that also be passed down through generations, especially if it's helpful? So he said, okay, selective breeding, specifically livestock and pets, for desired traits. We do that not just with livestock and pets, but also even our vegetables, our produce now. So much of that is selective breeding for what we were looking for. His other piece of evidence was he made this trip to the Galapagos Islands. You've probably heard of them before. I highly encourage you to take a moment to Google them. They're fascinating. It's kind of this, for the most part, pretty preserved island band near the equator that has many, many organisms that are not influenced by our world. There are not people really living there. So it's a pure and interesting place. And each island is a little different on what lives there and why it lives there. So he started by observing finches, which is a type of bird, and specifically the beaks. Finches. So we look at the beaks. He noticed variation from island to island. And he was like, wait a second. The variation gives that bird an advantage on that island. So if they have a longer, skinnier beak, they're able, and he watched what they ate. He's like, wow, they're eating way inside of this flower, this very specific food that they could only reach if they had that specific beak. He's like, huh, that's weird. And each island had its own like dietary need that that bird met because, well, he's like, why? Why is that happening? So he knows variation from island to island, depending on the food source. Which is super cool. And from that, he concluded, he's like, all right, so here are some of my observations. And this is years of work, years and years and years of work, years of notes. And he said, okay, well, my theory, that being mine being Darwin, is that how do I want to put this? So there's variation amongst species caused by, and you probably can make this prediction, boom, mutations. If the mutation is, or let me say, provides an advantage it will pass to offspring, or will be more likely to pass to offspring. Over time, the population has this trait. And really is only, so one offspring having a certain adaptation because of a mutation, that's not really evolution. Evolution, you don't really call it evolution until a large portion of the population has acquired that trait. And the reason they do that is because, well, going back to the giraffe example, if a giraffe was suddenly born with a slightly longer neck, maybe, just a little bit, that mutation caused that particular organism to have greater ability to get food. He could reach higher. And then he is more likely to live. The others are less likely to live. So they're less likely to pass on their traits. Whereas the one with the longer neck was survived and passed on his trait or her trait. And then over time, that keeps happening. And the food source is driving this. They need to reach high into the trees. And so each generation that has the longest neck, that's the one that's most likely to pass it on. And next thing you know, you've got a giraffe, which at some point a giraffe did not look like that. They didn't have necks like that. So there has been a lot of evidence. Now we can look at how DNA is passed down over time based on all kinds of really cool research that's being done. We can look at fossil records. We can look at 1,000 different ways that support Darwinism. But at that time, it was kind of like, well, we don't know. But Darwin's the man because he called it. Okay, so that's that. I know that was a lot of writing. I'm sorry. But at least your free choice is not a lot of writing. So you are going to draw it out. Now you can use the giraffe or you can use anything. There's so many examples in nature of Darwinism. So take a moment. You're going to, I put an X here because remember, this is the one that's not accepted anymore. This is now accepted. Lamarckism, theory of acquired traits, draw a picture to represent. And you can look up pictures online and kind of draw from there or even trace it if you want to put a piece of paper behind here. Draw something that represents that trait or that theory, excuse me, and then do the same thing for Darwinism. Pictures are very helpful for sealing it in your brain. I recommend coloring it too, because that's also very helpful. Hope you have fun with it. Take your time. Do not rush it. It's not something you're going to be proud of if you rush it. It's also less likely to stick in your mind. Okay, that's it for evolution and natural selection. Could have 20 lessons on this, but we don't have the time. So I hope that makes sense. See you later.